A shy girl, scribbling hundreds of pages in a journal. Letters to a father whose face she's never seen. A young millionaire cancelling the biggest interview of his life, trembling on the edge of a train platform, paralyzed by panic. Downpour, a lost notebook, and two strangers colliding over the same wound being left behind no one knew. They shared the same blood. Rain poured down over Union Station that grey afternoon, drumming against the glass-domed ceiling in a steady, whispering rhythm. Stragglers hurried through the terminal, collars raised, eyes forward, dragging suitcases behind them. No one noticed the young man standing alone near the edge of Platform 3, trembling from something colder than the October air. Ethan Cole didn't look like the others. He carried no bags, checked no schedule, showed no concern for arrivals or departures. He simply stood there, shoulders slumped, hands buried deep in the soaked pockets of a dark trench coat. His gaze drifted toward the vanishing point of the tracks, where a red train light blinked in the thick curtain of rain. His heart pounded, part cold, part panic, the third attack that week. The live interview he was supposed to do had been just an hour ago, a highly produced event, an audience waiting, cameras poised, but he'd walked off set before the lights even came on. No explanation, no return. Only the deafening thud of his heartbeat and an overwhelming urge to disappear. He didn't know why he'd come to the station, maybe because it was the one place in the city where no one needed a reason to linger. No one asked questions if you sat alone. No one looked twice. His footsteps echoed along the red brick corridor, past peeling walls, a stopped antique clock, the lingering scent of pastry from the cafe in the corner. Something about the place felt distant, familiar in the way old photographs do. He weaved past a few passengers seeking cover from the rain and found a wooden bench near the platform door. It was cold, empty, uninviting, perfect for vanishing. Rain dripped from his hair down the back of his neck as he sat, his hands, unsteady, clasped together. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, a breath pushing past his lips like a stifled cry. And then he saw it, a soft beige linen object tucked beside him on the bench, a notebook. Its fabric cover was crinkled from moisture but intact, fastened with a small wooden button and cord. No name, no markings. Something someone had left behind, a girl maybe, a traveler in a rush, or someone who had once sat here lost like him. He meant to set it aside, but something in him resisted. That strange instinct only the broken understand. He unlooped the cord. The pages were damp, edges curled, filled with neat flowing handwriting. He turned to the first page. I've always imagined my father as a good man. But if he isn't, do I still have the right to be angry with him? The words pierced through the armor Ethan had spent years constructing. His hands froze, his eyes lingered. There was something eerily familiar in the voice on the page, a quiet ache, a question only those who've waited in silence can bear to ask. He'd never kept a journal. But if he had, maybe he would have started the same way. Rain kept falling. Outside the fogged window, the train rolled away, its red light fading. But inside him something cracked, and all at once began to piece itself back together with every tender line he read. He turned another page. My mother says I look like him, but I've never seen his face. All I have is a description of a small tattoo behind his ear. A swallow. Every time I walk past a station, I search the crowd for men with a tattoo behind their ear. Ethan sat up, hand tightening around the notebook's spine. Like a lightning bolt through memory, an image struck. An old photo of his father, the man Ethan had only known through grainy snapshots, bending over a motorcycle, a small swallow inked behind his left ear. Cold sweat crept down his back, even as rain chilled the air. It couldn't be. He stared at the handwriting, read on. His heart thundered. In that instant, the world receded. No trains, no rain, no murmurs of strangers. Only him, and the voice of a girl he didn't know, but who carried the same quiet loneliness he had buried for years. A girl who had waited for a father who never came, a man who had never dared face the truth, a notebook born of pain, and now opening memories neither of them knew they shared. Ethan couldn't explain what made him keep reading. Only that in that moment he no longer felt alone. He pulled a pen from his coat pocket, didn't write a word, just underlined the opening sentence. "No one should witness me like this," he whispered. And yet, maybe this very moment, this fragile, broken moment, had brought him to the truth he'd spent a lifetime running from. In the rain-soaked pages of the notebook, Lila's handwriting emerged like stitches sewn across the fragile skin of a heart. Her words made no attempt to impress or defend. They were simple, earnest, like the voice of a child who's never been heard, and Ethan read them line by line as if listening to an echo from a time he'd never touched. "I've been coming to this station since I was little. At first with my mother, when we used to meet my aunt's night train. But later I came alone. I always chose the wooden bench at the end. It creaked when I sat. My mom hated that sound, said it was broken, but I liked it. It reminded me of myself. Always there, even when no one noticed." Ethan pictured her, small, slight, rain-dark hair clinging to her neck, spine straight, wide eyes filled with too much hope. The pages painted the portrait of a child who had spent her entire youth imagining the face of someone she'd never met, a man called Father. One entry stood out, the ink darker, perhaps written on a day that meant more than the rest. "Today is my birthday. Mom made a small cake like she does every year, but this year I snuck it out with me, put it in a box from the bakery near the station. I waited for him from 3 o'clock. It started to rain at 3:42. The image took form in Ethan's mind, vivid as a memory. Little Lila, no more than 6, sitting beneath the sloped overhang of Union Station. The first winter rain misted down like thin smoke, seeping into the shoulders of her worn coat. In her lap, a white paper box. Inside it, a single cupcake with a crooked candle still lit against the breeze. Her head bowed, she sang softly to herself, "Happy birthday to me." No applause. No wishes. She glanced at the arrivals board, the letters flickering, lines shifting, but none of the names made her smile. She stopped singing, let out a quiet breath. A drop slid down her cheek, whether rain or a tear. No one could. Say her back in the present. Ethan's hands clutched the notebook tighter. He'd had birthdays alone, but he'd never imagined someone might be coming for him. Lila had. She imagined, then waited, then was disappointed, and imagined again, another passage. I always wondered if he was close by. Maybe he sat a few benches away. Maybe he stepped off a train, then left without turning back. Mom said he had a tattoo behind his left ear, a swallow. I always watched. Anyone with a tattoo there, I imagined he was the one. Ethan froze. That was the tattoo in the photograph. The old image of his father leaning over a motorbike, the small bird inked just behind his ear. It wasn't a common mark. And Lila, this girl he'd never known, had spent her childhood scanning crowds for it, holding on to the hope that one day it would lead her to him. He turned the page. The ink had changed tone, as if Lila had written it after a long silence. I used to think my father was a hero, like in storybooks. He wasn't here because he was doing something bigger, something brave. But then I began to wonder if he was good. Why didn't he come back? I don't hate him. I'm just tired. Tired of having to imagine the face of someone I don't know. Tired of pretending to forgive someone who never asked to be forgiven. Ethan couldn't read anymore, not because he didn't want to. Because something inside him was screaming. Lila's words were the ones he'd never let himself say. He too had once imagined his father was elsewhere for a noble reason. Until, like Lila, he understood the only truth that made sense. The man had simply chosen not to return. Her journal was a mirror, reflecting the sorrow Ethan had locked away for 30 years. He glanced around the station, as if she might be near. Maybe she still came here. Maybe she was somewhere now, writing a new page, unaware that a stranger was reading her past and finding his own in it. The slow hum of the PA system rolled through the station, stretching out the words of a delayed train, then fading again. Ethan rested the notebook on his lap, left it open. The wind carried in the smell of rain, of diesel from the tracks, of old memories. I think if I sit here long enough, he'll see me. The last line of the page pulsed in his mind like a dream that refused to dissolve. He had never imagined anyone could be so much like him. And now, he couldn't help but wonder. Would he have the courage to look her in the eyes? Or would he be just another man who walked past, never looking back? Ethan didn't leave Union Station that grey afternoon. Instead, he pulled the notebook from his coat pocket and began jotting down dates, locations, and the scattered details Lila had mentioned in her journal, each one now a thin thread stitching together two lives that once seemed to run parallel but unconnected. A small apartment in North Chicago, above an old bakery. Mom said he used to call her Peach. No one else ever did. He read that line over and over through the night. Somewhere in the fog of his memory, the word Peach carried a faint ring, like a sound once heard from a distance and long forgotten. When he was young, he'd sometimes wake to his mother whispering in her sleep, calling someone's name, half in love, half in grief. Peach, don't go. That hazy recollection now returned like a shard of glass pressed gently into his chest. The next morning, without telling anyone, Ethan drove to the old neighborhood in Chicago, where his mother had lived when she was young. He didn't plan it, didn't overthink. He simply went. As if something long avoided had finally risen to meet him. The bakery had changed its name, but not its shape. The upstairs balcony was still there, its wooden railing weathered silver. A few dried plants hung limply from rusted hooks. Ethan stood beneath it, gazing upward, as if watching a silent reel of someone else's life, flickering back into motion. He stepped inside. The new owner knew nothing of who had once lived above, but Ethan didn't need specifics. He only needed to breathe the air, catch the light, let the smell of yeast and rising dough wrap around him, and imagine the days his father had lived there. The days he left Ethan's mother behind to begin something new. That night, Ethan descended into his mother's basement and opened the old cedar trunk. She'd been gone for years, but she'd kept everything: letters, photographs, even postcards she never sent. He found a dusty leather-bound photo album and turned the pages slowly, his fingers gentle as if brushing against breath, and then, near the center, was the photo that hollowed the air in his lungs. His father, around 30, bent over a rusty bicycle. The afternoon sun caught his profile, and just behind his left ear, the tattoo of a small swallow, the same swallow Lila had described. The photo trembled in Ethan's hand. How did she know about that tattoo, if she never met him? The question escaped as a whisper, brittle and raw. He stared at the photo, then shut his eyes. That old fear returned, the one that said he didn't really know the man who gave him life. Didn't know who he had loved, why he had left, how many unnamed wounds he had carved into children who had never once been called mine. Ethan turned back to Lila's words, retracing every clue. He brewed tea on a gas stove, never used an electric kettle. Mom said he liked the way the water sounded as it boiled, said it reminded him of a day beginning. Ethan remembered his mother saying that once in passing, as she stirred honey into a mug. He hadn't thought much of it then, but now it felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place with an almost eerie click. There was no doubt anymore. The man who abandoned Ethan was the same man Lila had spent years writing about, imagining, searching for, waiting on. And if what she wrote was real, then she wasn't a stranger. She was his sister. Ethan didn't cry. He just sat there, surrounded by the quiet ache of the old room, the photograph resting in his hands, his eyes fixed on a place that didn't exist anymore. Something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just the truth. It was how he saw his own childhood, not as a solitary shadow hiding in the corner, but as one of two children, in two different stations, waiting with the same broken hope. He placed the photo in his palm and folded a sheet of paper beside it. On it, he wrote the details he now knew to be true, as if preparing for something larger than himself. The night wind slipped through the window frame. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast a faint silhouette of his father on the wall, blurred but undeniable. No one could rewrite the past, but maybe, just maybe, Ethan was finding his way towards something else, not the truth, the connection that was never named. Aunt Margaret's apartment sat tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the west side of the city, where nothing ever seemed to change. The old maple trees still blushed orange and red each fall, and the worn grey stone steps still bore the familiar weight of Ethan's childhood feet. He hadn't visited in years, not out of avoidance exactly. Sometimes silence between two people felt kinder than questions. Neither dared to ask. Margaret was his mother's younger sister, the only woman in the family who'd stayed close, though always at a careful distance, as if proximity might stir the dust of old wounds best left undisturbed. When Ethan called, she didn't press him for a reason. She only said, "Come by this afternoon. The mint tea's still the same." When the wooden door opened, a familiar scent of cinnamon and old paper met him like a whispered memory. She looked unchanged, white hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low, a hand-knit sweater stretched soft over her frame, her eyes bright but tired. Ethan stepped in, shed his coat, and settled into the armchair across from her, hands wrapped around a steaming cup. "You've lost weight," she said, not as a scolding, but like noting a shift in weather. Ethan didn't answer. He let his eyes wander around the room, still filled with books, framed photographs, and the handcrafted pottery she'd collected over the years. Each object whispered a story. Afternoons spent baking, his mother knitting beside the radio, sunlight sifting through lace curtains. No one ever spoke of his father in those days, but his absence lingered everywhere, in every silence, every hesitating gesture his mother made. "You have something to ask," Margaret said, pouring a second cup. Ethan nodded. His fingers brushed the edge of the small notebook. Lila's journal, now something he carried like an extension of himself. "I read a diary," he began, "written by a girl. It has these very specific details. She describes a man with a swallow tattoo behind his ear. Says he lived in a little apartment in North Chicago, called her mother Peach." Margaret said nothing. Her eyes softened, though her breath grew heavier. "I need to know, if it's possible." Ethan trailed off, as if saying, the words would make them irrevocably real. Margaret stood, walked slowly to the wooden cabinet in the corner, the one where she kept old keepsakes. She rifled through drawers until she found a pale blue tin box dented at one corner. Inside were bundles of letters, yellowed and bound with a ribbon gone nearly white. She opened the box, pulled out a single envelope, brittle with time. "This is from your mother," she said, offering it to him. She wrote it after he left, but never sent it. Ethan took it with trembling hands. It felt light, but the moment was heavy. He opened it carefully, as if the past itself might tear. His mother's handwriting unfurled on the page, slanted, gentle, like a voice speaking just above a whisper. "I'm not writing this to blame you. I'm writing because I don't want my heart to harden. Ethan's grown now. He's asked about you more than once. I only said he used to love me. Maybe it's true, maybe not. I can't tell anymore. But if you're reading this, then I want you to know I forgave you. Not because you deserved it, but because I don't want our son to grow up with bitterness." Ethan folded the letter back, his eyes stinging. Margaret didn't speak. She reached over and laid her hand gently on his. "You should know," she said softly. "Your mother forgave." But she never forgot. The tears came then, not in a rush, not in shudders, just quiet, steady drops, the kind that slip through when something long held finally releases. The grief of a boy who'd spent a lifetime pretending the wound. "No longer hurt. The girl in the journal," Ethan said slowly, "she might be his daughter. With someone else." Margaret nodded. "Once he sent a photo. No note. Just a picture of a little girl, about your age when you started school. Your mother never spoke of it, but she kept it. In her desk drawer," Ethan exhaled, long and deep. "One man, 2 children. Raised in 2 cities, 2 homes, beneath the same quiet ache of absence. The afternoon passed like an old film, real. Sunlight shifting through curtains, the shadow of maple leaves dancing on the wall. Ethan sat in it all, surrounded by memory, by silence and a truth that was unfolding. Slow, tender, undeniable. He wasn't ready to meet Lila. Not yet, but he would be. First, he needed to know her, to listen, to carry her voice beside his own before he could speak the words she deserved to hear. And that journey began with his mother's letter, with forgiveness soft as morning mist. Union Station in the afternoon always wore a muted sadness, as if the building itself had learned to hold its breath for those who arrived bearing the weight of the past. Light filtered through the high glass dome, casting soft gold across the polished stone corridors, a glow that felt more like memory than hope. Ethan had returned, for the third day in a row. No plan, no destination, just to sit, to watch. He chose the same bench where he'd first found the notebook. Each time he lowered himself onto the worn wood, he ran a hand along its splintering surface, tracing the small fractures like veins in time, lines that stretched from the girl he'd never met to the man he now struggled to understand. He didn't know what she looked like, but he was certain if he saw her he would know. The first day he simply sat, watched faces pass, each stride, each glance, each hand gripping a notebook or a phone. He tried not to expect anything. But whenever a young woman entered his line of vision, his heart misfired, slightly offbeat. The second day he brought the notebook, didn't read it, just held it, like an emotional compass. The third day, today, he began to feel something closer to waiting, no longer a vague search, a precise yearning to see the one who had written those quiet, aching lines that mirrored his own. A young woman entered through the station's main doors, shoulder-length hair, beige coat, a linen-bound notebook in hand. Ethan's. Heart paused. He stood, crossed the floor quickly toward her. "Excuse me," he said, breath catching. She turned, her eyes clear, curious. Not her, not Lila, just another stranger carrying something that looked familiar. Ethan smiled, sheepish, and stepped back. Laughed quietly to himself, a soft, embarrassed sound. Then he stood still, watching her walk away, her footsteps folding into the crowd. Something about that moment left him feeling small, like a child searching for his father in a crowded supermarket, lost among 1,000 almosts. He returned to the bench, sat again. A breeze swept through the station, scattering loose papers from a nearby traveler. Ethan helped gather them, then bowed his head, eyes landing once more on the familiar cracks in the wood. "I've never wanted to meet a stranger this much," he whispered, not to be heard, just to admit it to himself. Train 217 was 17 minutes late. When the announcement came over the speaker, Ethan looked up without meaning to and saw her. She was seated at the far end of the bench. Still, quiet, like a figure in a watercolor painting. Her hair fell gently forward, a notebook in her lap, not to read, but to write. Her head was bowed, the curve of her back familiar in some unknowable way, and her hand moved slowly, steadily across the page. She didn't look around, didn't check her phone. She wrote, deliberate lines, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak, he just watched. From a distance, he didn't want to disturb the quiet world she had made for herself. A gust lifted a few old newspapers. A yellow leaf fell to her feet. She didn't notice. Her eyes stayed on the page. Her pen never stopped, and perhaps that, more than anything, was what moved him. She didn't write to remember. She wrote to live. No one around noticed. No one knew that a kind of reunion was taking place. Unspoken, unnamed, but real. Ethan gripped the notebook in his lap. He didn't need confirmation. He knew this was her, the girl who'd written the first line that had stopped his world on a rainy afternoon. "I've always imagined my father as a good man. But if he isn't, do I still have the right to be angry with him?" The sentence returned to him now, like a melody threading everything that would come next. He didn't approach, not yet. Some connections must be formed from afar, in silence, as wounds begin to close from the inside out, needing no hand to touch them to know their healing. Ethan remained there until the girl stood, gathered her things and walked slowly from the station, unaware that someone had been writing his own story from the words she thought had long been forgotten. Ethan returned to Union Station every day after that, no longer searching with restless eyes, no longer catching his breath every time a familiar figure crossed his line of sight. He came the way one learns to carry pain, not with resistance, but with rhythm, quietly, steadily, as if it were a part of him now, something that no longer needed to be fixed, only lived with. He didn't try to see Lila anymore, but he always chose a bench far enough to watch. Some days she didn't come, others she arrived and left too quickly, but whenever she sat down and began to write, Ethan would quietly slip her old journal from his coat pocket, place, lay it on his lap and read. The first time he read it, the pain in her words had gripped him like a wave, but now he read with a different kind of understanding. Each page no longer felt like the story of a stranger. It was a whisper from someone deeply known, bound by blood, yet raised in a parallel life that had never once crossed his. Lila wrote about hearing her mother cry at night, about the clatter of a spoon hitting the sink after a silent phone call, about the first time she'd heard someone call her mother Peach in a dream. Ethan too remembered the sound of his mother's sobs, muffled behind a closed door. He remembered the shape of absence, how it pressed in on every silence, every story left half told. Then he reached a line that made him stop and sit completely still. I used to wish I had a brother. Not because I wanted someone to play with, but because I needed someone who knew what this felt like. He froze, read slower. Each word pierced the long-held quiet he'd mistaken for healing. If I had someone like that, I wouldn't feel so crazy for imagining every man could be my father. I wouldn't have to keep all these dreams to myself, like letters that never get delivered. Ethan closed the journal, held it to his chest, as though he were holding a part of her heart. He knew he couldn't stay silent forever, but he also knew this moment wasn't meant for truth, not yet. Even if it was a beautiful one, some truths have to be swallowed whole, quietly digested, before they're ready to be spoken. One afternoon, sitting in his usual spot, Ethan looked up just as Lila lifted her eyes from the page. For a breath, a blink, their gazes met. A second, maybe less, but it was enough. Enough for Ethan to see something familiar in her expression, a reflection, a thread. She furrowed her brow, then quickly dropped her gaze, returning to her writing. Maybe she hadn't noticed. Maybe he was just another man sitting nearby, a stranger passing through. But Ethan knew that moment, brief as it was, confirmed what he had long felt. This wasn't just a stranger writing about the same wound. This was family. This was the echo of a soul he hadn't known he'd lost. That night, Ethan returned home and set the journal on the table. He took a small sheet of paper, sat with it for a long time before putting pen to it. No name, no introduction. Just a single line carefully written, as if even the ink might tremble. If you knew I was listening, would you keep writing? He folded the note and tucked it into the journal, right at the page where she'd written about the brother she wished. She'd had not a confession, not a revelation, just a way to say, I'm here. And I understand. Tomorrow he would return the notebook, not because it was time to tell her everything, but because it was time for Lila to know she had never truly been writing into silence. And maybe, for the first time, her words would find their way home. That afternoon the sky held its peace. The air around Union Station softened, as if even the weather understood that today called for stillness. No thunder murmured from the distance. No rain clattered against the glass dome. Only pale sunlight streamed through the high-arched windows, gilding the dust on the old wooden benches with a quiet gold. Ethan stood 10 steps away from her. He had been there for some time, holding the journal wrapped carefully in his hands, the folded note inside like a sliver of his heart set apart, waiting to be returned to its rightful keeper. Lila sat on the familiar bench, writing as she always did. She wore headphones, her head bowed in concentration. The light caught her hair just right, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the loose strands falling across her brow. Ethan stepped forward, softly, slowly. He didn't want to shatter. the fragile world she had created for herself. But the journal pulsed in his grip, and inside him, something burned loud and wordless. He came to stand just behind her. He bent slightly, hand hovering over the journal, about to place it beside her. Then, almost instinctively, his other hand lifted, reaching for her shoulder, to let her know, to say in touch alone that someone had read her, truly read her, that someone had carried her pain like it was their own. But he stopped, mid-air, his hand paused, as if pulled back by the invisible thread of fear, of reverence, of knowing that some silences are not meant to be broken by touch. Not? No, not like this. He lowered his hand gently and placed the journal beside her, drew out the note, set it on top. The paper was white, unadorned, holding just a single line in slanted, careful handwriting. If you knew I was listening, would you keep writing? No name, no explanation, only a question, just enough for one soul to feel the presence of another. Ethan stepped back. He stood for a moment longer, watching Lila, this girl who might be his sister, who might be a missing chapter of his childhood, still writing, still shaping the unfinished pieces of her life. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. When Lila finally lifted her head, the soft hum of piano music still played in her ears from the same worn playlist she always listened to when she wrote. Her gaze fell to the notebook beside her. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. She looked around, no one. Her fingers touched the fabric cover. She opened it. Her heart caught. It was her journal, the one she thought she'd lost. The same pages, the same familiar lines, and there under the first sentence a single mark, a line of ink that wasn't hers. She turned the pages. In the center, where she had once written about the brother she'd only wished into being, was a folded slip of paper. She opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The ink warm. Tilted slightly right, strong but tender. If you knew I was listening, would you keep writing? She didn't understand, not right away. But something in her eyes shifted. A quiet smile rose, brief and unreadable. Grief or gratitude or maybe wonder. All she knew was that something inside her, some echoing hollow, had just been gently filled. Some people come not to change us, but to witness. No names, no speeches, just the right question at the right moment. And then they leave, as if their presence only ever needed to be that, one small breath enough to move someone's life ever so slightly forward. Lila stayed on the old wooden bench longer than usual. Union Station seemed brighter that day, not because of the sunlight outside, but because of something gentler spreading from within her, like the feeling after a long rain, when the sea. Streets are still slick, but people begin to walk without fear of slipping. She read the note again. If you knew I was listening, would you keep writing? A simple line, unsigned. But there was something in the way the words tilted slightly, the space between each line, something that felt like a whisper from someone who had been listening for a long time. Not interrupting, not intruding, just listening. She let out a soft breath. Her fingers brushed the fabric cover of the journal as if touching something sacred. Someone had read not just her words, but the spaces between them. The quiet she had tucked away where no one could see. She pulled out her pen, a fresh page, the paper still slightly warped from dampness, but blank and waiting. The first line flowed out like water freed from a dam. I no longer wait for my father, but maybe. I'll wait for someone willing to listen. Her hand paused, then moved again. I don't know who you are yet, but I know you understand. I don't need someone to fix the past for me, only someone to tell me that what I felt was real. She wrote for the first time, not to fill a void or chase a missing piece, but to open something new. It wasn't the same old ache, bleeding through pages like an unhealed wound. It was something strange, tender, the feeling of waking after a long dream and realizing that morning had finally come. A tear fell onto the page. Not rain, not sorrow, relief. She wiped it away and kept writing. If I keep writing, will you still be there listening? No answer came, only the faint call of the station's PA system, announcing the departure of a distant train. Lila smiled softly. as if she already knew the answer. A while later, she stood. She didn't know if the stranger would ever return, but it no longer mattered the way it once had. She had written words she never thought she could, and someone had heard them, enough to crack open a heart that had been closed for too long. She placed her hand on the journal and closed it gently, no longer wrapping it tightly with its old cord, no longer hiding it under her pillow like a shameful secret. She would keep writing, not because she needed to be heard, but because now she knew her voice was worthy of being spoken aloud. In the distance, a man passed down the corridor of the station. He didn't look her way. She didn't look his. They didn't need to meet each other's eyes, because sometimes the most important things are already said in the quietest ways. Lila stepped out of the station, her stride lighter, her gaze no longer searching but looking straight ahead. In her hand, the journal, no longer a vault of old wounds but a place for beginnings. And inside her, not a desperate plea of "please hear me," but a gentle invitation. "I'm still writing. If you're still listening up here, I'm here." If you discovered that the one who wrote that journal might be the sister you never knew you had, what would you do? Would you tell her the truth, or stay silent to protect the fragile peace she's found? Share your thoughts, because this story is only just beginning.